everyone. This is Nathan with People's Town Hall. People's Town Hall is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to the simple idea that our democracy is stronger and better when our lawmakers take regular occasion to meet with and listen to the people they work for, which is their constituents. We're coming to you today in Lane County, Oregon, on both a special occasion and something of a somber moment. Special occasion because this is Senator Ron Wyden's 1,000th public town hall in his time representing the state of Oregon. That is an incredible testament to his dedication to public service, the dedication of his team that works so hard to make these events possible. And it's also a testament to the people of Oregon. These 1,000 town halls wouldn't mean nearly as much, of course, if thousands and thousands of Oregonians hadn't attended these, showed up, spoken out, asked substantive questions, sometimes tough questions, and asked the most of our elected officials to represent us well in our nation's capital. Now, today is a day, with so much going on abroad that reminds us of how precious it is to live in a democracy where we can participate in these conversations. And it's so vital that we do. So I thank everyone here live on the call for participating and everyone watching on Facebook and YouTube. We do hope to get to see some of your comments as well. I'm sure, like many of you, I am personally interested to hear from Senator Wyden the latest on what is happening with the crisis abroad. Senator Wyden, thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on 1,000 town halls.
Thank you, Nathan, and we'll talk a little bit about Oregon's tradition and public service of throwing open the doors to folks and hearing their comments in just a minute. But I do want to reflect on what you correctly characterized as a very somber moment in terms of what our country is facing with respect to Vladimir Putin at this hour. Vladimir Putin has engaged in an unprovoked assault on a sovereign country based on blatant lies, and it comes right from the darkest chapters of a dictator's playbook. And as those of you know from following these kinds of discussions, the Wyden family knows something about escaping the savagery of a dictator in Europe. And sadly, the Ukrainian people are now bearing the full brunt of brutality. You're talking about somebody who, in my view, is willing to do just about anything with his henchmen to attack Ukraine, and he must incur severe penalties for his actions. And I think Vladimir Putin and his gang of oligarchs have to pay a severe price for unprovoked aggression. Now, in the coming days, and I gather as we were just coming over from the law school, I was just visiting with the students over the last hour, the president has spoken. He's made it clear that he intends to impose a variety of sanctions that directly target the assets and economic sectors prized by Russia's oligarchs and elites. Everything from export controls to banking restrictions, freezing Russians' Western slush funds, to banning goods in Russia's trading sector. And as for the puppet regime he's going to try to set up in Ukraine, I want folks at home to know that I'm going to use my chairmanship in the Senate Finance Committee to push a complete bar on any dealings with these quislings, and to make sure you understand how serious I am about these sanctions, and particularly using the Finance Committee. We are just going to keep upping the ante, continue to up the ante until Vladimir Putin is pushing any remaining rubles he has in a wheelbarrow. We are just going to have to stay at it with that kind of tenacity. So with that, and I know Nathan, throwing open the doors of government means we're going to get a lot of questions from folks about this and other topics. I want to make sure everybody knows how appreciative I am of Oregonians being part of what I think is public service when you're doing it right, which is throwing open the doors of government We've done it on 1,000 occasions, and it's part of a promise I made to Oregonians. And if anything, it is even more important in polarized times, because I think what we do with these town meetings is we provide a common space for civil discourse, a common space where you can exchange ideas, make it clear you have a difference of opinion, perhaps with the previous speaker, but we're going to do it the Oregon way, which is part of trying to find common ground and pursuing sensible discussions. First town hall meeting was held in Fossil in Wheeler County, our smallest county. The guy from the city, Oregon's first new senator in 3 decades, said we're going to have the first meeting. Since I'm from Portland, my only regret with respect to my wonderful hometown is I didn't get to play for the Trailblazers. That will be a continuing source of frustration. But I'm not a United States senator from the state of Portland. I'm a United States senator to represent every nook and cranny. And at a time when extremists falsely and recklessly label insurrection and violence as legitimate political discourse, I think these town hall meetings are just more important than ever. And given the events of the last few weeks in Portland, I want to make clear that violence is unacceptable from any quarter, from any place on the political spectrum. And violence against anybody exercising their First Amendment rights in our country cannot be normalized as well. So today, on a cold winter day, cold winter afternoon in Lane County, we're going to have a chance to have this 1,000th town meeting. Choosing where to hold it was kind of like trying to pick between sunrises in the Cascades or sunsets on the coast. And I chose Lane County because it was where I first fell in love almost a half century ago as a law student at the University of Oregon with our incredible state. And I was just over talking at the law school with the students about how I had a chance back then to connect with an Oregonian whose name is synonymous with real public service, and that's Senator Wayne Morris. And I had the chance to drive him around. And back then, if a town had even a lunch program for senior citizens, that was considered a big deal. So Senator Morris would get asked questions about the elderly, and he'd say, Ron's going to look it up for you. And that's sort of how I got involved in public service. Now, Senator Morris also said, no matter the odds, never be afraid to speak out about what's right. And I know we're going to have a lot of people doing that this afternoon. There's never a shortage of issues to speak on. Tensions with Russia, which we mentioned, inflation, racial justice, environmental fears. The list goes on and on. But I just think Senator Morris's wise guidance to speak out about what's right, and that's what these meetings have been about, is trying to work together, trying to find ways to find out what's right, is what Oregon is all about. And today we're going to throw open the doors of digital democracy and do it the Oregon way. Big thanks to Nathan Williams and People's Town Hall for again helping to kind of shorten the distance between Oregon and Washington, D.C. Sometimes Oregon and folks at home, they'll see me at a Fred Meyer and they make me feel like, to them, Washington, D.C. sometimes feels like it's Mars for all the connection it has with their life. So what you all are doing is giving us a chance to shorten the distance. Let's go right to questions. We've got a lot to talk about, and I want to get educated by Oregonians in Southwestern Oregon. And let's have at it, Nathan.
Terrific. Let's get right into it. First up, we have Victoria.
Thank you, Nathan, for hosting. And hi, Senator Wyden. Thank you so much for opening your doors. I'm Victoria Zeeble. I live in Springfield, and I'm recently retired. Prior to the happenings of the last couple of days, I thought the most important thing I wanted to hear you talk about is your efforts to preserve our democracy, including to counteract attempts to suppress the right of all Americans to vote, and steps that you're taking to safeguard our election integrity.
Would you like me to start with that?
You know, I would, because I think it's important.
Well, not only is it important, I think it's fair to say it sort of undergirds all other issues. So my guess is today we'll talk about prescription drugs, we'll talk about gas prices, we'll talk about what to do about housing, we'll talk about a whole host of issues, in addition, of course, to making sure we, as I say, up the ante against Vladimir Putin and really draw a line right now with the strongest possible economic sanctions to contain him. So we're going to talk about a lot of issues, but our democracy and protecting the right to vote are really two sides of one coin. And we have seen in more than a dozen states an effort to roll back, the clock. And I was there on January 6th. I saw what happened. And when I looked at those events, I said, what's going on here is what I thought happens in other countries. This doesn't happen in the United States. And I was the first senator elected completely by mail. Very proud of that. I'm a Democrat. Second senator elected completely by mail was a Republican, Gordon Smith. So we showed the country how to be bipartisan. And I'd still like to do it. It means that some Republicans are going to have to say Donald Trump was wrong on vote by mail, just like the late Dennis Richardson, our former Republican Secretary of State, said when he told Donald Trump he was plenty conservative, but Donald Trump was wrong when he was saying Oregon's system was plagued by fraud. Dennis Richardson, conservative Republican, said, no way. So what we are going to have to do is, number one, take on those misguided, efforts in various states to turn back the clock on basic kind of rights. And then we have to make sure, with respect to the January 6th investigation, that there is real accountability and nobody is above the law. And I'm working on legislation to prevent any future attacks on democracy. My bill is going to ensure that elections are more transparent, that partisan officials can't substitute their preferences for what the voters decide. And we're also having negotiations on what's called the Electoral Count Act. I don't think any one law, particularly that one, is enough to prevent election subversion. So that's why I'm going to have a package of more extensive, voter reforms. And I will continue, as long as I have the honor to represent Oregon in the United States Senate, I'll keep trying to take the Oregon approach, which is the best way to cast an informed vote. I'll take it so that everybody in America has a chance to vote the Oregon way.
Thanks for joining us, Victoria. Next up, we have Ruth Ann.
Hello, Senator Wyden.
Hello, hello.
Thank you for having these town halls. I really appreciate it. And it gives me an opportunity to get some of my issues front and center. And the one I'd like to talk to you about today is the budget and continuing resolutions. I'm a retired air traffic controller, and I'm a member of the National Active Retired Federal Employees Association. And I serve as the president for the local chapter, and I also serve as the president for the state. But I was retired when we had the federal government shutdown in 2018, end of 2018, 2019, and it was pretty painful to watch. But I guess continuing resolutions are better than a shutdown, but they're not, that's really not the way we should be doing business. So I you're with the Finance Committee, and I was wondering what can be done to make sure that we pass a budget by October 1st every year and get away from these continuing resolutions. Right now, we're in our third one for this year, which is good because the government's still running. But as I was a manager the last 8 years of my service, and every every October 1st, I had to go through hoops to try to brief the people about what was going to happen when they get furloughed. And then, of course, we had a continuing resolution, so that didn't happen. A month later, had to do it again. Takes a lot of time and effort. So there must be a better way to get the budget passed.
Ruth Ann, you're being way too logical for much of Washington, D.C., and you're absolutely right. This kind of perils of Pauline routine, where you wait until the last minute and you have big dramatics, and Ted Cruz is reading, children's books on the floor and saying that if he doesn't have his way, he's going to shut down the budget, and all of these kinds of theatrics doesn't give, just as your question implies, the predictability and the certainty that folks need to kind of plan and to operate the government as efficiently as possible. So I've long been, for reforms. There's been legislation in the past that would prevent members of Congress, which has not been the perfect answer from even getting paid unless you get, a timely deal. Right now, we have a real possibility to put things on, I think, a more thoughtful track. The two leaders of the appropriations committees, Pat Leahy of Vermont and Richard Shelby of Alabama, are retiring this year. And so, as you know, we've now kept the government open, a continuing resolution, but they're trying to flesh out, and I'm sure you've read about this, the bigger kind of budget decisions with respect to specific programs and specific agencies. I'm really hopeful they can get there. I've told them, because they're dealing with the spending side, the appropriations, say for the public health service, something like that, which is in their bailiwick. I'll do everything I can, working wherever possible in a bipartisan way to make tax decisions that will complement the spending decisions. So, for example, I'm very hopeful that we're going to be able to get our prescription drug cost containment effort, which is in our jurisdiction, passed, which helps to cut costs, going to hold down the price of insulin for seniors. I think that would be a big step forward. Senator Mike Crapo, Republican of Idaho, and I are going to pass, I believe, a big mental health effort, part of which could include the Medicaid program, which is in our jurisdiction as well. So not only are you right, Ruth Ann, but don't let anybody off the hook. The spending side, the classic, the budget, is the appropriations, where I think because we have two longtime members who like working together and who know this system is a mess and broken for the reasons you're talking about, could set an example for better decisions on spending. And Mike Crapo from Idaho, terrific colleague, very conservative, always is willing to talk to me. We're working also on the China competition bill, which is hugely important for more competitiveness, for having chips and semiconductors and decisions made that are going to create more high-skill, high-wage jobs. In each of these areas, we've got an opportunity on the tax policy side, where I'm the chair, to find some common ground, and it would ensure that we really, on both spending and taxes, make more sensible decisions. I'll call it the Ruth Ann doctrine.
Don't do that to me. But thank you very much.
Thanks. Great point.
Thanks so much for joining, Ruth Ann. Next up, we have Alex.
Hi, Nathan. Thank you for moderating, and hi, Senator Wyden.
Hello, hello.
So first and foremost, I really want to thank you for being a champion of science and for advocating for federally funded research. And so as a doctoral graduate myself of the University of Oregon and a recipient of research funding, I truly believe that it's my social responsibility to continue to be engaged with you and our other local and federal legislators to serve as a friendly reminder of how investment in science really does go beyond our local community and helps us to become the change that we want to see in the world. So since my graduation from the University of Oregon in 2020, I've been working for a biotech company called Abcam. So Abcam is a global company. It's headquartered in the UK, and we operate facilities in traditional biotech hubs like Massachusetts, California Bay Area, and of course, our home, Eugene, Oregon. So AbCam's mission globally is to provide tools to researchers to help them discover more faster. And although you may not have heard of us, our technologies are used in some of the COVID tests that you'll see sort of being used now in the present day. So investment in science at the state level has not only impacted my education at the University of Oregon, but it also continues to impact my career in science after I've graduated. And it does this because it shapes my community of peers, since AbCam partners with the university to provide important like STEM career opportunities to graduates within industry. And so the concern and the question that I have is that as Congress is finishing the work on the 2022 budget, the proposed framework so far means that domestic spending is going to take some cuts. And so as it stands, the budget contains these record increases for research agencies like NSF, NEH, and IES. And those increases are extremely necessary to sustain the growth and keep up the momentum in the scientific advancements that are at the forefront of our communities, our economy, and the world. So what are your thoughts on the likelihood that the budget agreement will continue to prioritize investments in science and innovation?
If my colleagues hear wonderful presentations like you've made in terms of what the budget choices are, you know, the whole point that you're conveying is that budgets aren't just a bunch of dark figures on white paper that just go on for pages and pages and you fall asleep after you've read, you know, a couple of them. They're about our hopes and aspirations and how we really want to see scarce dollars be spent. And I was just listing some of the agencies you mentioned. You mentioned National Science Foundation, you mentioned NIH. I mean, these are programs where when you invest $1 today, you have a chance to have a big economic multiplier down the road. It's true in pharmaceuticals, where you're talking about. It's true in areas like we're talking about with respect to the China bill and semiconductors. And this is hugely important to Oregon, because when we talk about making investments in areas like healthcare, chips in Oregon, it's a twofer. They're high skill, high wage jobs, and they give people a better quality of life. So what I try to do is kind of sort of my general approach to legislation is I say there's really nothing more important than innovation and fairness. And the two really go hand in hand, because if you innovate, you have more opportunities with dollars to be more inclusive and fairer, and it makes dollars stretch further. And I always am looking for ways to promote innovation. In the 2017 tax bill, for example, the Trump bill, the most flawed part was he cut the research and development tax credit. And as soon as we can, we're going to put that back, because dollar for dollar, those are smart investments. So message sent, and I'm going to keep the focus on innovation and fairness, because I think the two go hand in hand, so that the programs that you're talking about, which I think most of what you listed, there were 3 or 4, is on the spending side. I'm going to support those, but I'm also going to take the areas of the tax code, like the provision in the 2017 bill that rolled back research and development incentives, and try to make changes there to advance on both spending and taxes, the very sensible priorities you just laid out.
Thanks, Senator.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us, Alex. Next up, we have Colin.
Hey, Senator Wyden. You used to be such a defender of civil liberties, and you would speak out against the surveillance state and against sacrificing liberties for government promises of security. However, now it seems that you either are silent or you vocally support government-driven censorship of social media platforms inside the United States, the dangerous rise of designating ordinary Americans as domestic terrorists, and the expansion of questionable federal counterterrorism tactics being used on average Americans, often with ideologies different from your own. My question for you is, what are you planning to do to show your constituents that you're going to use the immense power and access that you have being on the Senate's Intelligence Committee to defend the civil liberties of all Americans despite their ideologies and despite the excuse of the day that we can expect to arise out of Washington?
Out of a way to advance the debate, I don't know of any examples that would suggest that I've changed. In fact, quite the opposite. The examples that most Americans who feel very strongly about privacy and protecting people from censorship say, if anything, I put more time into it. And for example, last week, Senator Martin Heinrich and I of New Mexico blew the whistle on one of the great areas where there is potential for surveillance on Americans. It's called 12333. It's an executive order that came from the Reagan years. And unlike the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, there aren't the same kind of transparent requirements. And so most people who follow these issues, and I consider them particularly important on my agenda, say, if anything, I've been building on the priorities that I've long had. So could you maybe give an example of what you're talking about? Because I think if someone would like to raise a question, I'd like to hear about it, because 10 days ago, Martin Heinrich, in the culmination of a 2-year effort, blew the whistle on something that most Americans thought had been prohibited many years ago.
Well, I will respond. You have spoken several times about your openness about stopping certain speakers on media platforms that you consider to be obscene, and first that goes against the First Amendment. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is the DOJ has been targeting using the counterterrorism division to go against parents that have been speaking openly against the actions of their school boards. And also you've been calling outright people who were in the January 6th protests terrorists. And you know full well, being part of the Intelligence Committee, that that designation of terrorism opens up a whole can of worms in terms of the Patriot Act and other anti-terrorism bills. And so it is ironic that you would call such protests terrorists when you had over 100 days of protests in your home city, Portland, that burnt down several, or attempted to burn down several Portland precincts, police stations, and you never once called them terrorism, and I wouldn't either. But I think this loose use of the terrorist term with what you know about these anti-terrorism bills is extremely dangerous. So there was a few examples that you can respond to.
Okay, let's take each one of them separately. First, you seem to feel that I've changed my position with respect to platforms. I wrote the law, Section 230, which is the ultimate protection for free speech. Section 230 basically says it won't be government that will make changes in speech, but private sector entities like the platforms would have the ability to get racist or misogynist kinds of comments off their site. Remember, those are decisions made in the private sector. So respectfully, on the platforms, I couldn't disagree with you more for the reason that I described. I wrote the ultimate, I'm going to tick off each one of the points you made. I wrote the ultimate First Amendment free speech law, which is Section 230.
But then you
Number two, let me just finish each one of them because you're raising important points. The third point you made deals with what you feel has happened in our area, with respect to violence. I have denounced violence repeatedly as recently as 48 hours ago. First sentence I made in my statement about what happened is violence from any quarter. Unacceptable, unacceptable, unacceptable. So what I said 48 hours ago is not in line with what you're talking about. Now, the second area is this matter of whether the Justice Department is going after school boards. I've heard that people have mentioned that. I think that that's not an appropriate role with respect to the separation of powers. And the school issues and school boards have historically been left at the local level. Now, if there are federal civil rights issues or things of that nature, that would be an argument for involvement by the federal level. But I haven't made any statement on that whatever. So in each of these three areas where you've said I've retreated from my position with respect to being, I think, the Senate's leading hawk on fighting surveillance and protecting people's First Amendment rights, in each one of those areas, respectfully, I disagree.
And Colin, I'll let you have one more response here, but then
Sure.
I do want to get to
Sure.
everybody before the end of the
Absolutely.
program.
Sure.
I would agree that the section 203 leaves it to
230, sir.
230. Sorry, 230 does leave it to private platforms to monitor. But then you have open demands coming from the Biden administration, demanding them to censor certain groups for certain medical topics that they might discuss, and that they're endangering lives. And when you have certain privileges that are coming from the federal government and certain subsidies that are coming from the federal government, when you have the leading executive branch then demanding that these, without legislation, demanding from these different platforms to censor, that is coercion. They are coercion. And I haven't heard you speak up against the censorship of medical information online. And so that would be one. The other one is you openly called the January 6th folks domestic terrorists, and that terminology, like I said, opens up a can of worms. You openly, and as you should, condemn any violence, and as do I. But to call them domestic terrorists when not calling other violent groups and other violent behavior domestic terrorism is a kind of a double standard. And so that is what I'm pointing out with that. And
I believe we would just have a very significant difference with respect to what happened on January 6th. Leading Republicans, in fact, the Republican leader of the Senate basically said that what January 6th was all about was a insurrection focused on overturning a constitutionally mandated process. But if you'll give me some examples, I'd be glad to continue the dialogue. We have different opinion. Guess what? That's what Oregon's all about. That's what these discussions are about. Please give me some examples. I'd be glad to continue the discussion.
And Colin, I'd be happy to put you in touch with Senator Wyden's team after the town hall. So we do need to get to some more of our questioners. Let's try to keep these at an hour. Next up, we have Beverly.
Good afternoon, Senator Wyden. Thank you so much for these town halls. I've been to in-person town halls with you when I lived in the Dalles, out to Sherman County. And I have to say the virtual version is not the same, but here I am in Florence right now on the Oregon coast where I live now, and spent the morning hunting agates and didn't have to drive, to Eugene and do that whole thing. So I just hope that we can go forward, even when they are in person, that we still get to have this kind of option for, making it more convenient. So with that, my question is all about Medicare and basically our extremely complicated healthcare system. I don't think my story is different than most people in the United States. I have spent so many countless hours navigating healthcare, from even when I had employer-based healthcare, when I didn't have employer healthcare and I had to navigate before the Affordable Care Act, after the Affordable Care Act, which of course was better, and now I am on Medicare. Medicare is a whole lot easier. I will just say that right from the get-go. But our healthcare system is really all about bankruptcies and GoFundMe. And, we hear about it all the time. And I just feel so fortunate. My Medicare story is, about not knowing what to do when I signed up for Medicare. And if there's Medicare Advantage plans, and I didn't know about that. And there's the supplements, I didn't know about that. I tried to do research. It's complicated. So I thought, well, I'm just going to do the Medicare supplement because I can always change my mind. But if you do the Medicare Advantage plan and you change your mind, you're going to be penalized. So that seemed kind of like a red flag to me. So 4 months later, after I got on Medicare, I was diagnosed with cancer. Okay, my first thought was, what's going to happen? How much is this going to cost? And am I going to lose my house? I mean, I had no idea. So I went to my first appointment over here in Eugene at the Willamette Valley Cancer Institute and met with their insurance advisor. And guess what? You have great insurance. I got a piece of paper in the mail that said your $42,000 estimate for care was going to cost me absolutely nothing. Oh, happy day. Now, imagine if that could be possible for everybody. That your first thought when you get a bad diagnosis or you're in an accident or you have some kind of severe health issue, your first thought no longer is, what is it going to cost? Or I can't call the ambulance because, what's that going to cost? So, I feel very fortunate that I am on Medicare and that it doesn't cost as much as what I used to have to pay, but I pay my premium for Medicare. I pay my premium for my supplement. I buy my vision, my dental, my prescriptions. And I thought, oh gosh, that's going to be so complicated. But guess what? It's not complicated. All of that gets deducted out of my checking account. I go to the doctor. I don't pay a copay. I don't even get a bill. I pay my Medicare deductible once a year, $198, $203, whatever it is now. And it's simple. I don't have to manage anything. But guess what? They're trying to do this new thing called direct contracting entities, where it sounds like I could just all of a sudden lose my capability of managing my own care. So my question, Senator Wyden, is, I know that you view Medicare as the backbone of our healthcare system, and it really is. My husband's on VA, which is awesome. So we are very well taken care of right now, but I want it for everybody. And I don't want it to be complicated and have everybody just not have the worry about healthcare anymore.
Good. Beverly, this is the topic that I went into public service for, because I was director of the Great Panthers for almost 7 years. And every fiber of my being is about healthcare is a basic human right, period, full stop. If you don't have your health and your loved ones don't have your health, everything else kind of goes by, the board. And there's no question we lag behind a lot of countries. Right now, I'm leading the fight in the Senate to take on big pharma with respect to holding down the cost of medicine. We're pushing as hard as we can so that by late spring, for example, we can get rid of what I call the healthcare curse, the restriction that bars Medicare from negotiating to hold down the cost of medicine. And I led the push as chairman of the Finance Committee to make sure that when we pass the law, the negotiation starts with the most expensive drugs, the cancer drugs, the arthritis drugs, the really, big ones. So I'm all in on this fight. I'm all in on every single principle that you talked about, simplicity. I mean, the whole thing is a mess. And one question I had is, you have Part A of Medicare, the hospital portion, and then you have an outpatient portion. Do you have a company that runs your outpatient part? Is there who does this? Do you just purchase physician services, or what do you do for the stuff that isn't hospital?
So I have a Medigap plan G. Yep. And it's like $137 a month. But, there's no deductible other than that small $200. So, yeah.
Who sells your Part G policy?
It's a Regents plan.
Got it. Okay.
And they've been great.
So I wrote the Medigap rules years ago because I wanted to make them simple. And what has made this conversation challenging is that nearly all the seniors who say that Medicare is a completely government-run program also have a private insurer. Many in Oregon, we have one of the highest percentages of Medicare Advantage in the country. That'd be like Kaiser or somebody like, like that. Very large percentage of seniors. And then many seniors have a private plan under Part B, and they use the simple rules that I really authored years ago because I had just come from the Great Panthers. So the question then becomes, given that the countries with the most, quote, socialized healthcare systems have a substantial private system, the Canadians, the French, the English, alongside their public system, how do we find a way so that people who want those options, for example, labor unions, which are really growing in Oregon because people want workers to have more of a voice, many of them have a lot of reservations about going to something like Medicare for all or just Medicare because they want to negotiate. So they come to me and say, Ron, you're the chairman of the finance committee. Make sure that we don't lose that chance to negotiate private systems. And so what I have said is my first choice, trying to bring together people who share our views. Healthcare is a basic right. We want it simpler. We want to get more for our money because in each of those areas, there's a lot of common ground. I've said the best step now is to keep expanding Medicare type choices, public options, lowering the age, letting people buy in. On the finance committee, I've got 4 or 5 colleagues, each of who has their own kind of expansion of public options. So that may be our next opportunity to get close to what you're talking about, making sure that Medicare plays, a bigger role, giving people choice and making the system simpler. Like my colleagues who say, hey, look, if you just lower the age to 60, there's so many elderly widows who can't make it, to 65. That's going to be fairly simple. So message sent. And by the way, so you'll know, the second we can do in-person town meetings again, we're going to do them because nothing is better than doing this in person. And what I've done is said, what's the next best alternative? And I usually go to the newspaper. Today I'm at KLCC because they're seen as kind of, pretty neutral kind of parties and just try to do the best we can to be accountable. But the second we can do in-person town hall meetings, we're going to do them.
Great. Thanks for the question, Beverly. Along the note of in-person town hall meetings, for those watching on Facebook, we just added a poll to ask you your comfort level of doing in-person town hall meetings in this spring. So we'd love to hear from folks what you are thinking about how to have these vital conversations in the period of time there we are right now. So next up, we have Myra. Go ahead, Myra.
Hello, Senator Wyden.
Hello.
My name's Myra Powell, and I want to thank you for being so diligent about having these meetings, these town halls, and listening to your constituents. It's a real honor to have a senator that does that. And my question is about all the good bills that have been passed in the Congress, but not in the Senate yet. There's some examples of the Women's Health Protection Act, the Postal Service Reform, John Lewis voting rights. But how realistic is it that some of these bills are going to get passed this year before the midterms through the Senate?
The Postal Service Reform Bill should have been passed some time ago. And what happened is an example of just how stubborn sometimes you see the folks on the far right be when they prevent a bill that has bipartisan support. The Postal Service Reform Bill, which passed the House of Representatives with bipartisan support, is designed to help the Postal Service get out from under this idea that they pre-fund their retirement for decades and decades and decades beyond any reasonable expectation. And the House bill would change that. You'd have to fund your retirement packages responsibly, but not for 75 years in kind of one fell swoop. And the Postal Service would be able to get into new areas and the like. We were all prepared, Myra, we were all prepared before the Senate broke for the President's Day holiday to pass that bill. And one of the senators in the Senate found a technical little error. I mean, that had nothing to do with the substance of the bill, nothing. And it used to be the tradition, you take care of this technical error with a snap of the fingers, and everybody would get on with the business because it wasn't good faith to block a bill just for some little kind of technical error. Well, that's what happened last week. When we get back, we will put that bill on the floor. It will go through a more extended process just to get it formally considered because there was this objection to a technical error. But it is a kind of picture of how if all you're interested in doing is obstructing something, because they knew the bill was going to pass, that we would be able to pass it later, that I think makes people angry across the country. Bipartisan bill, could have passed the Senate before the President's Day break, had support on both sides of the aisle. One person objects on something technical, should have been corrected like that. We'll get it passed. Now, you're right that it's time in the Senate to make some big decisions. We haven't mentioned the climate, issue. I got through the Senate Finance Committee a transformative bill with respect to clean energy. I basically took the tax code on energy and threw it in the trash can, just lit it up, gone, and said for the future, we'd have 3 incentives rather than 40 for clean energy, clean transportation, energy efficiency. And we would say in the future, you'd be technology neutral. And the more you reduce carbon emissions, the bigger your tax savings. Never been done before. Tax breaks get handed out like, lollipops. I said, not going to do that anymore. In the future, the more you reduce carbon emissions, the bigger your tax, savings. And this has been described as the most transformative bill with respect to energy yet. So we're going to get that passed. I think Joe Manchin is pretty much ready to support this. He's got some questions about other areas of the budget, but that's going to be one of my top priorities when Congress comes back next week after the President's Day recess, is to get that bill with prescription drugs and clean energy for America, and then some of the tax changes that are so important because we've got a handful of the people at the very top using their accountants to basically avoid paying taxes. And I don't think that's right. And I want to make some changes there too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Thanks for joining us, Myra. Next up, we have Karen.
Hello, Senator Wyden. This is Karen Radke in Florence, actually north of Florence.
Florence is out in force today.
Yes, we are.
Good.
Okay. So can you give us an update on what's being done about the federal minimum wage? And, particularly, I'm concerned about the sub-minimum federal wage for tipped employees, which, incredible as it sounds, is currently as low as $2.13 an hour in 16 states. Now, Oregon is not part of this. We do not allow employers to pay those kind of sub-minimum wages. But, what happens in other states affects the whole country indirectly. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, as we know, Oregon really made some history with some minimum wage reforms, and they made it clear in Oregon, we're not going to have a lower wage for tipped workers. I think that ought to be true everywhere. So I think that should just be part of any federal changes. And as far as I'm concerned, there's never been a stronger case for a $15 minimum wage than there is right now during the COVID, pandemic. We got lots of people just trying to keep the economy afloat, and too many of them are being paid, a starvation wage. So in a sense, we had talked earlier about a variety of jobs. We want people to get higher salaries. I mean, that's a good thing. We want them to have a chance to get the education and training and get higher paying positions. We also want them to have a basic floor of dignity and a basic floor of justice. And that's why I think we ought to raise the federal minimum wage. There's never been a stronger case for a $15 minimum. Shouldn't be a lower wage for tipped workers. And there ought to be a change so that everybody says we've made a decision that there's going to be a floor of economic dignity for everyone. And that's what a living wage would do.
Perfect. Thanks for the question, Karen. Next up, we have Wendy. Wendy, you feel free to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Senator Wyden,
Hello.
I'm so proud of you, and I've been grateful for your good work for Oregon all these many, many years. Been a PCP for 34 years, always speaking highly of you. And congratulations on your 1,000th. That's really good. So I want you to know I'm really scared. Last November, I almost had my second heart attack because my town, every pharmacy was out of my life-saving insulin that I use for that nasty disease called diabetes. And I mean, I lost probably close to 21 nights of sleep. There was such a shortage that even calling Coos Bay and pharmacies up and down, no one knew when there would be any insulin. It was a type called Levemir. And I just want to know what you guys are working on to try to protect our lives. There's so many life-saving drugs that, I don't know, they say they're sitting on a ship out there somewhere or what, but it's a real, there's a lot of people with diabetes in Oregon. I'd hate to see them all end up in a situation where they couldn't have their life-saving medicine.
So are you getting the insulin you need now?
I do, but I switched brands. I switched to Lantus, and that became available. But that was the roughest month I've had in a long time. And I don't know. I'm always thinking, well, when will the Lantus be hard to find? Because I heard you speak about the price of insulin and all that, and I just wondered about these shortages for all of us.
Yeah, there are problems, as everybody following this whole debate about the economy knows, with the global supply chain, that it's difficult to get the medicine that people need in a timely way, which is why it's so important that we work to fix the supply chain, bottlenecks. For example, I've been very supportive of the effort to get more truckers, because a lot of our truckers, you just see their fleet sitting around because they don't have workers. So in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we had a plan to make it possible to train more young people who are interested in the trucking field. So I'm working on the supply chain aspect. I'm supporting the research efforts to get more life-saving drugs to people. And the fact is, a lot of people are getting ripped off by the price of insulin. The fact is that insulin prices have gone up something like 10-fold over the last decade, and the drug is not 10 times better. It's the same drug. And it's because the pharmaceutical companies are taking advantage of people. And Senator Grassley and I the Republican of Iowa, actually did a report describing how the supply chain is broke at every single step with respect to insulin at the manufacturer. We know that there are these PBMs, the pharmaceutical benefit managers. You're in a small town, hard to get pharmaceuticals in small towns. We know that, a lot of them have been closing. Oregon's lost a lot of them. Well, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid looks like they may be supportive of my proposal that would help the small pharmacies get your insulin with a rule that said that the big insurance companies couldn't push them around and jack up the fees on small pharmacies that are closing them down and making them unavailable to you. So supply chain, number one, working on that. Research and development for life-saving drugs, as we had a person participating went through, and then price fairness. Those are all three things that I'm working on with respect to these crucial drugs to fight diabetes. And if you or anyone has further questions, we're right online at wyden.senate.gov, and give Nathan a phone number and an email, and we'll get back to you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Next up, we have Jane.
Hello, Senator Wyden.
Hello. Looks like are you at your house, Jane? I'm trying to figure out where you are.
I live in a trailer.
I was wondering. Okay.
Yeah. And this is such a kick. I wasn't aware that I was going to be able to ask a question. So this is wonderful.
Yeah, plenty of time.
Well, this is a question somewhat personal to me too. There are, with prices so high, I can't afford rents. And there are so many people that are just living on Social Security with a very low amount. And, maybe they just made minimum wage or they've had rough circumstances in life. They're just not able to have a reasonable lifestyle. I was wondering, I know it's impossible to pass certain legislation now. We need more Democrats in Congress to pass these kinds of legislation. Is it on the Democratic roster at all to have a floor in which people on Social Security don't get below a certain amount, whatever that amount is, to buttress them a little bit better than they are now? There's so many people that aren't making a livable Social Security amount.
Yeah, there is no question that there are some big challenges ahead of us with respect to this program that does, as I think most Oregonians would agree, does overall a tremendous job with their primary objective, providing basic economic income security of millions of Americans. Now, Social Security has been around for 80 years, recessions and wars and global pandemics, and they've never once missed a payment. Not once, keeping 20 million people out of poverty, including 1 million kids. And there are unique features. You can't outlive your benefits. Coverage is portable from job to job. Benefits are increased when there's a cost of living. And I and others are raising questions with respect to whether that cost of living is being addressed, fairly. Now, there are issues with respect to the trust funds. There is the retirement arm, the health arm, and the disability, arm, and there are challenges, with all. And you asked, does the Senate have any plans with respect to the trust funds? The answer is yes. And we have already begun to look at some of those options with respect to how you establish, how the revenue comes in and the wage base and the like. But I can tell you, as chairman of the Finance Committee, I am very involved in looking at ways to address the challenge with respect to solvency. And some of the math is pretty obvious. Thousands and thousands of Americans turn 65 every single day and will do so for decades to come. So we've made bipartisan reforms over the years with respect to the needs of Social Security, while at the same time keeping that impressive track record. And we're looking at ways to do it again.
Great. So glad you could join us today, Jane.
Thank you.
So we are up against our hour. In typical Lane County fashion, we received dozens of submissions to join this conversation, and the Facebook conversation has been lively and substantive. So I want to thank everyone who's participated in this conversation. I know there are so many questions we didn't get to, but encourage folks to, again, utilize Senator Wyden's website, reach out to his staff, and I imagine a lot of your questions will get answered directly. Again, Senator Wyden, thank you so much for joining us for your 1,000th town hall. The vast majority of those in person, of course, virtual for now, but your commitment to listening to Oregonians, especially those who don't necessarily agree with you, is commendable, and look forward to many more. Senator Wyden, last word.
Nathan, I'll touch on the importance of town meetings in a moment, but I want to just, before we wrap up, let Oregonians know we will be continuing to reach out to hear their views with respect to what our country is facing with respect to Vladimir Putin. I will just tell Oregonians who are following this that I think that a big part of this is Putin, who's almost 70 years old. He sees what he's doing now as his legacy. What he wants to do is, in effect, recreate the old Soviet Union. And he is seeing that in Ukraine, there are little flickerings of interest in the West and democracy. And guess what? That's what modern communications and modern transportation does. It shows people the advantages of some of what we're talking about, the Oregon way, and sharing ideas and innovation and the like. And Putin doesn't want that. He's a dictator. He's an autocrat. And I mentioned that we've seen people over the history of Europe and what the toll their misguided ideas can take. And it's really time to make it clear that we are going to stand regularly, not just today, regularly, behind principles that are core democratic, ideas: freedom of the press, freedom to communicate, freedom to enjoy the opportunities to go where you want, when you want. And Vladimir Putin does not want that. And you look at him over the years. A few years ago, you used to see him, riding around with his shirt off, and he'd be showing off. You don't see him doing that kind of thing anymore. Now he is interested in one last kind of major effort, which is trying to find a way to crush freedom in Ukraine, find a way to achieve his real dream, which is recreating the Soviet Union. And we're making it clear that we're not going to support that. And we haven't even really talked about it, but much of what Putin has been up to are significant violations of basic rules of law and morality. And we're going to push back. And I'm going to be leading that in the Senate Finance Committee. That's why I mentioned the strength of the economic sanctions. One of my colleagues says that challenge with respect to sanctions and Putin, this is going to be the mother of all sanctions efforts. And I think that reflects the seriousness. And as far as the town meeting, Nathan, I want to thank you for doing this. I also want to thank our staff that has been so patient over the years, always trying to find a way when there was a late vote in the Senate or a challenge with missing a plane to keep the pledge that we made to Oregonians. And I don't have all the answers, not by a long shot, but I know that this is the way we ought to be doing public service, where we throw open, the doors of government. And people, guess what? They have differences of opinion. We heard a fellow who didn't agree with me with respect to my analysis of January 6th and my saying that that was a terrorist effort to try to overturn, an election. And that was not legitimate political discourse. And in Oregon, we let people express these differences of opinion. That's the point of town meetings and why they're so important. And that's what you do at People's Town Hall, Nathan. That's what we're going to keep doing in the future. Thank you, Oregon, not just for today, but for this road that gave me the opportunity to do public service, what I think is the Oregon way, by throwing open the doors of democracy. And that's the way we're going to do it in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Senator. Take care. We'll see you next time.